Hey, everybody, and welcome to the show. This is Liz joining you as usual from Central Virginia and the ancestral lands of the Monacan Nation. And I am so glad that you are here with me today for if you're listening when it's being released, the very last episode of 2023. Unbelievable. This is the end of my fourth year of hosting this show. And gosh, what a ride. So I'm so glad that you're here with me today. Couple of things I wanted to tell you about really quickly. Oh, before I forget, um, do you know whose native lands you're on? If you don't, there's a great map, native-land.ca. You can go check that out. It will tell you whose native lands you're residing on. I always put that in the show notes. So be sure to check it out. And then a couple of classes that I have coming up in the new year, I want to tell you about. This is through my school, Home to Her Academy, which I started in the fall. And the mission is to bring together really qualified teachers who can teach us about the divine feminine in ways that honor the historical record, but are also deeply embodied and then practical too. You know, what are we going to do with this information? And intersectional. So not looking at this in a vacuum or doing any kind of spiritual bypassing. So I've got a couple of classes coming up. In January, and I really should know the dates right off the top of my head, but maybe that will be like an allure for you to go over to hometoheracademy.com and check them out. One is my Home to Her Story, Home to Your Story class. I taught that in the fall. And this is my introduction to the wisdom of the sacred feminine. And it really is about merging that, giving you some of that factual historical information, but then playing around with what we do with this from an embodied perspective. The first group was so beautiful. Gosh, it was such an amazing experience. And I would love to have you join me for this. This is going to be on Sunday afternoons. I think it's the Sunday after the Martin Luther King Junior holiday here in the United States, but I'll make sure I've got that in the show notes for you. And then oh, I'm sorry, no, it's Wednesdays. I'm doing it on Wednesdays. The Sunday one is my Returning to the Well class with my dear friend, Elizabeth Gould. And this class is all about mothering and the divine feminine, which has been such a potent part of my journey of, figuring out. My kids have kind of been on the journey of this with me the whole way. So really kind of fumbling around and figuring out, how do I incorporate what I've learned about the sacred feminine into my parenting practices? What does this look like in terms of how I show up for them, what I'm teaching them, what kind of family rituals and ceremony that we're bringing in, all of that. And so that class is the one that's on Sunday afternoons with Elizabeth, who's going to be joining us all the way from New Zealand. Pretty cool. So I'll put all that in the show notes for you. And then last thing, I can't get out of here without giving you a quick plug for my book, Home to Her, Walking the Transformative Path of the Sacred Feminine. It's a 2023 Nautilus Gold Award winner. Wahoo. I did say I was going to stop saying that at the end of 2023, so you don't have to hear that the award plug anymore. But it's out from Womancraft Publishing. I've had many of those authors on this show, and if you are interested in it, please do check it out and consider. You can buy it wherever you want, but consider buying it directly from Womancraft. It's an amazing woman-owned business. And if you've read it, I would love your thoughts. I'd love your reviews. Reviews on Amazon and Goodreads in particular are super helpful. And the same goes for the show. If you like this show, I would love to get a favorable review from you. Reviews on iTunes are super helpful, Apple Podcasts, but I'll take them anywhere. And yeah, tell me what you think. I love it when you reach out to me on social and tell me your thoughts about episodes or give me suggestions or feedback. It's all welcome. All right. And so with that, let's get on with why you are really here. All right. So today I'm super excited about this episode for a couple of reasons. One, I don't know where we're gonna go. We're gonna see where we go. But the reason that I wanted to have this guest on today is like so many of us, I'm interested in astrology. I am in no way an expert, and I'm one of those people that tends to get a little overwhelmed sometimes with. I'm also kind of a little bit obsessive, and so then I'll try to like, what does this mean? What should I do? But I have loved my guest perspectives and writings, and I feel like I have learned so much from her, and so I wanted to have her on the show, and I've also not really done much in the realm of astrology on the show, which is kind of hard to believe after 4 years of hosting it. Some of you may remember early on, I had on a guest who was looking more at lunar cycles and things like that. But that's probably as close as I've gotten to this topic. So I'm really excited about that. And then the other thing that really struck me about her, I knew that we have this shared priestess path, and maybe we'll talk about that. So I know that she's got some experience with the 13 moons and the sanctuary of the open heart. But she's written really, really beautifully about grief and loss. And it affected me so profoundly, her ability and her willingness to be open and vulnerable about that. I think there's a ripple effect that um, and maybe we'll talk about that it has profound effects on others too, to be able to witness it and to almost like we're collectively holding the grief with her in some way. So who knows what we're going to cover? I think we're going to cover lots of cool stuff, but let me go ahead and introduce her to you now. Damascena Tanis is a writer, astrologer, and a recently bereaved mother living on the shores of Lake Erie with her 3 earthbound children. She is currently learning how to be the mother of a child who has journeyed beyond the veil. She is also the founder of the Planetary Priestess Mystery School devoted to Venus, and she writes about this journey, astrology, spirituality, and her messy human life on Facebook and on her popular website. And she is joining us today from her home in Lakewood, Ohio. Damascena, I'm so honored to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited. I'm excited to see where the conversational journey takes us. I'm a huge fan of dialogue. So just
Yay.
wandering.
Yeah, well, and I guess one thing I feel like I've definitely learned in hosting this show over the last 4 years. When I started, um, yeah, I can get pretty rigid, like, oh, I want everything to be perfect, and
Mm,
yeah, and so over the years, what I've learned though is that it really, I may have notes and whatnot, but there's an energy that sort of carries us where we need to go,
yeah.
and so a lot of times we end up going places that I didn't know and I didn't expect. And so it's always quite a delightful experience. And I have
Mm,
no doubt that today will be the same.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but that said, I do always usually start in the same place. Getting a little bit of information about your spiritual background. And as I'm sure listeners have heard me say this before, I do this just because kind of selfishly, I'm curious. I'm always fascinated, like what brought people to where they are now. But I also love to hear from you. Are there pieces that you needed to let go to be where you are now? Is there kind of a thread line from the beginning? So if you're okay with that, I would love to start there.
Yeah. So the question is about my spiritual background.
Yeah, growing up, what was that like for you, and how has that kind of informed where you are today?
Yeah. Uh, um, so I grew up like a lot of people in a very liberal congregational church, and I loved it. We had a really great children's section, I guess. There was lots of different activities, and I spent lots of time at church, enjoyed it a lot. Then my parents got divorced when I was 12. So there was this huge rupture. You're part of a Christian community, and parents divorce while you're inside of a church family, and people have to take sides. And so our participation and attendance at church really waned. It was very political and complicated in ways that I didn't understand as a 12-year-old, like why the home rupture was translating into church. But I had always had a really strong spiritual connection to God, to Jesus. I was adopted, and so it's always been interesting to me to see how not having biological ties archetypally, like I could relate to anybody, like all of the adults in my life played these archetypal roles, including Jesus. And then I got pregnant when I was 15, so very young. If you spend any time in deep conversation with me, you know that I think that motherhood is a complete spiritual path. And I really think like I had my first spiritual awakening and awakening with the feminine inside of getting pregnant and, understanding my femininity. I'd always been somebody who really loved having my cycles, which didn't make sense. I didn't have a mother who loved her cycle. I grew up around feminists, in the 80s where it was like you never got caught out needing a man. We tried to kind of stuff away our femininity to fit into the kind of patriarchal man's world. And so, yeah, getting pregnant very young. And then I got a book by Monica Sjo during that pregnancy called The Great Cosmic Mother. And
So good.
she's an artist. And looking at her artwork was like uh activated. They're like portals, each one of her pieces, and it really activated something in me. And yeah, so that was like a bridge. It was really interesting. There were so many archetypal pieces that took place to kind of create that spiritual awakening, like to go from the good girl, like the Madonna, to the whore overnight, and to really wear the scarlet letter very proudly. Walking down the street as a young pregnant person, where everybody thought that that was just the biggest sin, and I was so completely enraptured with my body and my pregnancy and my growing child, like I did not care. And so, it was really interesting to be willing to hold all the projections of other people and to be so divinely connected to the feminine. And yeah, so that's kind of like my spiritual journey. I think on one hand has probably always been present. I've always had that connection to Jesus or that Christed consciousness. But the awakening with the feminine really happened when I was 15. And I've stayed sort of, on that path. There are times you dip in and out, right? Because life is happening. You get busier than others. But I think I've been working with the feminine principle. I think I incarnated to work with the feminine,
Mm.
probably. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about being pregnant, and I assume you were not married. Were you married? You were not
No,
married.
no, no, no. I was 15. So my
Yeah.
parents divorced. It caused
That's
this
sorry, that's my
gigantic rupture. Yeah.
that's my southern roots showing where you could totally
Yeah.
be married at 15 and pregnant.
Right. No, 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 no. I was just doing the thing that, most little girls do when their father's absent and they go and look for love in all the wrong
Yeah.
places and you've got
Yeah.
like a dysfunctional home. And so no, no, I was yeah, I was following the impulses of my body and trying to heal trauma, I think. I was adopted and I really remember feeling once I knew I was pregnant that like I was going to right this wrong and I was going to parent my child and do the thing that my mother wasn't able to do. Like she was forced to give me up for adoption. And so I think I was trying to heal trauma in some very primal and, of course, immature ways. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's also the fact that like even though we make mistakes or something that could be considered a mistake, it's all perfect. It's definitely was something that was written into my life path. My contract
Yeah.
with my oldest son is very fated and karmic, and we have a very deep soul connection. So,
Mm.
I mean, you can view it one of two ways, like was I young and I made a mistake, or was that supposed to happen? And you
Yeah.
never know, right?
No, and you mentioned, I don't know, just being the pregnant unwed mother. And then the connection to the divine feminine. There's obviously such a Mary component to that as well, right? And so I wonder if you were conscious of that connection to the feminine then, or if it's something that you looked back at later and was like, I see this thread line through my life, and perhaps that's when she showed up, or was it something then where you kind of understood it?
I think I began to understand tendrils of it when I was given that book and I was pregnant. Like there
Yeah.
were pieces that like um I really do love my adoptive mother, but she's she wasn't very feminine, like that just really wasn't her thing. And she's a great parent in terms of all of like the physical necessities and comfort. And she'd always be there for me. Um, but I needed real mothering. Like I needed genuine warmth, care, um, archetypal mirroring, I guess. And so there was this real sense that I was being adopted, like, which is something adoption's a really interesting subject, but from a psychic perspective, like the way the psyche understands it, it's like, once you adopt a mother, a person who isn't naturally your parent, you can adopt anybody as your parent. It's a kind of a non-natural thing, So there was this way that I felt like I had adopted whatever this principle was that I was feeling inside of looking at that book. I hope I'm languaging this well. It wasn't that I sat down and studied and read this book. It was more that I read some of it, but there was artwork that
Yeah.
like it activated something in me. And I felt a really strong connection to whatever that was that it activated. I mean, her artwork is like vaginas and caves and spirals and labyrinths and whatever that was, it gave me a sense of power, like innate power that I needed in that moment to kind of like navigate what I was going through. It was really a huge gift. I think I've understood it a lot better looking back, but there was something tangible then as well, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It does.
I don't think I realized that it was a spiritual path,
Yeah.
like, I didn't know there were goddess circles and moon circles and, places where the feminine met. This like organizing sense in the brain wasn't there, but it was like tapping into something primordial that connected me to something much bigger. And it was a connection I really needed. And being adopted, you feel sort of like isolated and alone. You don't have genetic mirroring. You don't have biological bonds whatsoever. And so I needed to feel connected to something bigger than me that mirrored me,
Mm-hmm.
not Jesus, who is a man, or God, who is a
Mm-hmm.
man. And that's all the church can offer. And in liberal churches, they didn't have Mary. We didn't
Right.
talk about Mary very often. So
Yeah.
image wise, archetypal image wise, I needed something. And her artwork gave that to me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll make sure I put a link in the show notes to her grandchildren, I think are they have an Instagram account for her, and I think it's
Yeah.
her daughter-in-law who's been, this is Monica Show we're talking about with the Great Cosmic
Mhm.
Mother, has been organizing some art shows in Europe, and I'm actually, somebody just told me last weekend that there might be one coming to the US, and I don't know if that's true or not, but I would be so excited if that were going to happen. But
Yeah, yeah. And
yeah.
she's really able to capture that kind of it's like being pulled into the experience of being connected to the red thread.
Mm,
That's just what she's able to do, I think, with her artwork, even though each piece looks different and it can almost look abstract or almost like a child did it. It's really interesting, but there's a cohesion and a power inside the visual images that are really remarkable.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes, I agree. Well, yeah, I'd love to hear about your relationship to the feminine. And so I use the language sacred feminine, but feel free to
Mhm.
use whatever works for you, divine feminine or goddess, or I don't know. But I'd love to know, and your relationship with this now, and how it informs who you are and how you walk in the world at this moment.
Yeah. So years later, I got married to a man who's from Palestine, and I got the opportunity to live overseas. And I remember stepping off the plane, like in Israel, you leave Ben Gurion Airport and you step out into like just this gorgeous area filled with sunshine. It's different. It's a little different than here. And breathing in the air there for the first time and feeling like I was home, like I had never had that experience of feeling like I was on land that was connected to me. And I didn't know that I didn't have that experience until I was stepping off into this land in Israel, Palestine, which is the Holy Land. And being there for a while was like being initiated into the feminine in a much different way. I'd always really loved Mary Magdalene. Like some of the archetypes had started to percolate through my life. between being 15 and 24, like going overseas. And so I started to develop some connections with feminine archetypes that felt resonant for me, but not like an alive, embodied relationship where like I was embodying it, I guess is, I
Mhm.
don't know if that's the right word. And so spending time in Palestine, um, women are very different, and I think I had this really patriarchal view of what like my mother-in-law or my sister-in-law's life might be like. They stay home, they cook, they clean. Um, the men go out, they a lot of women in Palestine work. I don't want to give the view that they don't. Um, but I had that view going over there and realizing that, oh, she doesn't have to stay home. She wants to stay home. And she loves every piece of what she's doing. Like if
Mhm.
she's sewing, she loves it. If she's, this is my mother-in-law. She's like, she had women's group she was meeting with. Women hung out with each other all the time. Like there was just a constant flow of women in and out of the house, sitting together, having coffee, making food, making clothes, doing work together, meeting outside of work. And I had never lived in an environment where there was so much camaraderie and sisterhood, right? So this was like my first introduction to truly like what women craft was. And then I'd go to different houses. So we'd be invited to like a relative's house that I had never met before. And the frequency and feeling tone inside of each house was different. And I'm like, oh, these are the women doing this. These are the women creating an atmosphere in their homes. These are the women creating a specific aesthetic and a specific um, coherence. And I'd never experienced women being really proud of that, like being really sovereign inside their own capacity to be with the feminine.
Mm.
And so I learned a lot about not needing to like be performative in the feminine, not needing to be um, connected to an archetype in the feminine, but really to just embody what my own feminine template was and to hold it like a central pole inside my home that emanated outwards. And yeah, so I mean, I guess I don't really. I then got into birth work and doing doula work. And from there, I started working with a home birth collective that did where we had midwives and stuff, and they had groups like birth group, mothers group, breastfeeding group. And that's when I began to get into like women's groups. And that was kind of my through line into things like 13 Moon and
Mhm.
understanding like the connection between the menstrual cycle, which was really important for doing like birth and conception work, and the actual moon and how that related to astrology, which was another thread that was one of mine. So I think they kind of like everything just conspired in this long, winding river to bring me to where I am now with the
Mm.
feminine. And I've
Mhm.
been through um, a journey with really loving archetypes. It's what I do, and really exploring the dimension beyond them and feeling like that dimension beyond archetypes is also vitally important, or as vitally important for our development as,
Mm.
just playing with the archetypes and stopping there.
Yeah, and I would love to hear you talk about that some because I know we had a nice chat before we did this recording, and I really appreciated your reflections on that. Because the astrology work you're doing is archetype informed, right? But I'd love to hear you talk more about how you do see going beyond those.
Yeah, so archetypes are the perfect pattern of the thing they represent. Jung called them like preloaded images. And so it's important to understand our kind of psychic blueprint, right? Like we all have this sort of these preloaded images that interact with each other in a specific way. So, to give you an example of what that could look like, if somebody has a connection between the moon and their Saturn, the moon kind of representing the feminine principle or the mother, the principle of the mother, and Saturn is kind of a patriarchal, cold archetype. And if I had these two in connection with each other, I might sense people, especially other women, as cold. right?
Mm.
Like I might just kind of project that onto people if I didn't know that. And thus I would call in experiences like that. So I would perceive potentially my mother is cold or other women or even relationships with men, just because the moon also represents the soul and sort of our internal world and our capacity to feel safe. And so I might always have to kind of work through feeling like um, I'm bumping up against a an authority figure inside of my relationships, right?
Mhm.
And so that's what archetypes are. They're sort of a perfect pattern of something. And when we get into archetypal work, if we stop at the archetype, I'll give you one other example, just because I know a lot of your listeners work with 13 Moon. There's like a goddess of love, right? Let's say we would like to work with the goddess of love. And there's nothing wrong with working with archetypes. I think it's actually fabulous. They become like gurus for us, right? And we want to embody some of the principles the goddess of love can give us. Maybe we are a Saturnine archetype and we feel like we're cold and rigid. And so we would like to learn how to flow and be in our sensuality and our pleasure more. So we want to work with the goddess of love to kind of help us learn these things. Well, there's this way that what we're doing is taking our inner gold, right? And hanging it around, like taking that mantle and hanging it around the shoulders of the um, goddess of love and saying, I want to learn from you. And so we become sort of externally oriented when we
Mm.
do that. We're looking outside of ourselves at this perfect template to help us learn something. And what happens is if our desire stays external, like we just always want to embody this thing and we've kind of like grabbed onto it and it's become crystallized now in our mind that that's the perfect template of a woman, then we're measuring ourselves by this standard. And if we're not taking the mantle of our inner gold back, then we stay in this almost performative state where we're trying to emulate something that's perfect. And so it's like gearing the mind towards something transcendental and sort of out of our reach, because perfection isn't something that's for humans, right? That's something that lives in the archetypal dimension of reality within the divine level of reality. It's humans were kind of supposed to be a little bit messy and imperfect, like soil. And so what's beyond the archetypal dimension is essentially that stage of development where we thank the goddess, with give her reverence for what she has shown us, and we take that mantle back and we integrate the lessons that we've learned from the goddess of love into our being. But we use the orientation of the internal of our essence as the thing that leads us. And so what we're really doing here, I think, is merging the divine and the human. And I think if we stay too oriented towards the archetypal, we're always sort of, we've got a hook outside of ourselves all the time.
Yeah, it makes me think of well, I mean, it just it makes sense to me. I think I'm guessing that a lot of my listeners, even if you didn't grow up in a monotheistic, Judeo-Christian tradition, like that is sort of the model that we have been given, and that's the cultural model that we look around and see, right? Like the God is outside of ourselves, and we will never, we'll just never be that. We're not meant to be as good as them, And so, yeah, and so then it becomes. I can see how it can become performative, um,
Yeah.
as opposed to really feeling it internally. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. And I think there's something really in the feminine about rooting our like compass, like turning it back around on us so that the compass and and what's leading our lives is like us, whether you see that compass as being in your womb or in your genitals or in your heart, depends. Some women have different ideas of where that like heart, like compass is. Um, but it's like using yourself as the authority and the reference point versus like needing to go what would the goddess of love, how would she respond in this moment? You know how we do that with Jesus, like that
Yes.
WWJD, what would Jesus do? There's this way that when we kind of get caught in the archetypal, working with archetypes, regardless of whether they're monotheistic, pantheistic, it doesn't matter. And then needing to kind of like check in with what they would do or how there's a
Mhm.
difference. There's a huge flip. And I think it's one of the things that Venus really teaches us, you know, and that's why I love working with Venus. There's a difference. I know I mentioned up front the moon and the moon being the template of the mother, but it's also the like undifferentiated ground of feminine being. So it's very tribal and communal and kind of general and vague. It's sort of this great round of nature, and we can map any image onto the moon. And Venus, she governs the differentiated feminine. So it's like our invitation into like, who are we as the goddess? Like who's Damascena really? What's my goddess template that doesn't have anything to do with one of the 12, the 13, the 44, you know,
Mhm.
thousand faces of the feminine. Like I don't need to fit into any mold. I am my own mold. And
Mhm.
that's the fun of playing with archetypes and then going beyond them is learning the different facets of the feminine through the archetypes and then figuring out which ones really resonate and fit, keeping the fun pieces and letting the other pieces go so that you really do become your own person that's internally oriented and then is using that internal orientation to guide your life. Yeah, versus needing an external um, mapping point to
Yes.
make choices. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's because you mentioned the inner gold, but as you've been talking, I keep just seeing the visual of like an inner excavation process, just like kind of going, deeper and deeper with your shovel or whatever it is, but just sort of mining for that thing that you're looking for within and the continual process of like slow revealing. Not
That's it.
necess yeah,
Yeah.
not necessarily like lifting it up like I have found it and now I am free, but no, just like I'm going to keep digging like, oh, and here's more and here's more. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's always that. And I mean, feminine spirituality is that. I mean, it's the descent. It's about going deeper. It's not about getting wider or going taller. It's just like how much more can I root? How
Yeah.
much more can I get down? And like the Venus cycle essentially is the myth of Inanna. We all kind of know that myth of the descent to the underworld. And so, like when I work with Venus and the Venus cycle, that's what we're doing. We're on the descent morning side of her cycle right now. And so it is a revealing. It's a cycle of revelation. And the descent side is about disrobing and getting naked and taking off, you know, where am I performing? Where am I wearing a mask? Where am I stuck in archetypal consciousness because I want to present this way or appear this way, or I'd like this kind of respect. I'd like the kind of respect that the um, Kali goddess gets. And so I need to keep, you know, putting myself forward. Or I've always been known as a dark Lilith. And um, as I descend, I notice that I'm a lot softer and pinker and lighter and more loving. You know, it's really fun to kind of do the disrobing work. And so yeah, I think as an astrologer you start to learn that everything is paradoxical, and there's always kind of a polarity. And so I love playing with archetypes. My whole work is constellated around archetypes, and then with my students taking them deeper, like on a kind of journey beyond the veil of even archetypes and discovering who we are, like at our very
Hmm.
essence and at our very core. And I think archetypes are hugely helpful in that discovery, right? But
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, and also and I'd love to just hear you confirm this or not, but also part of the work too is recognizing that we are not one thing, right? Like I know
yes.
in the 13 moon work, I mean, there might be ones that you resonate with more for perhaps, I don't know, probably astrological reasons or all kinds of
Mhm.
reasons that just there's a natural resonance there, but it's part of it is recognizing that all of that energy is within you, right?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
each archetype is something that has something to teach you and offer you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's kind of two um, maps I could offer in that realm, and I like both of them really well. So one is like we all have an entire zodiac in our charts, right? Like our whole chart is filled. And so the map of the zodiac is kind of the map of creation. It's a map of the universe. It's a map of consciousness. And so even if you don't have planets in a certain sign or house, you still have that sign and house in your chart. And so we are all so multifaceted and holographic as people. You know, we may have stronger fractals in one area of our lives, or fractals can act like magnets. Um, but even beyond just kind of this more abstract understanding, I love using the analogy of soil. Like we are soil, we are the feminine, so we are of earth, and soil does the best. It is the healthiest when it is cross-pollinated, when there's viruses, bacteria, germs inside of soil, when there's lots of diversity. It uses shit to make it more nutritious, more
Yeah.
nourishing. And so it's like, I just love to picture myself as soil. And when I get too sort of rigid or bogged down in kind of any one polarity or any one side or any kind of thing that I'm focusing on, I remember that, like, just like good soil, immune systems need that too to be strong. And so, there's this way that, like, our humanity is so diverse and so imperfect and so paradoxical. Um, yeah, I think we do. We have so many different facets.
Hmm. I really love that. I was thinking of, I've been a seeker for a long time and I've read so many and studied so many different spiritual traditions. And I think, and it could be just the way that I have experienced in my own orientation, but, any kind of tradition that was really heavy on transcendence,
Mm,
it's like the exact opposite of what you're saying, like in that
yeah,
it's just, you're just trying to strip away and purify and purify and purify until there's nothing there, except your divine essence, which sort of assumes that the shit is not part of the divine essence too. And I don't know. I love what you're saying, that of course it's all divine, it's all part of it. And so embracing all of it is divine as well.
exactly. Yeah. And the human shit stuff that shows up for us is really our spiritual curriculum. It's interesting. Like they play off of each other and they're both really necessary. We started this Venus cycle in Leo, and Leo, I think it's interesting because if you really study the essence of even the kind of transcendental solar kind of king cults, which are Christianity and all of those, um, you actually discover that there's a seed in there that is common to both traditions, both the feminine and the masculine. And the sun is like the archetype of the solar god, the solar king, right? And that is Jesus as a solar king. Um, and what it is Leo, each sign is like a mystery school. So the mystery school of Leo, what we're doing is we're allowing ourselves to be penetrated so deeply that our essence, that inner gold I just talked about, it can ooze out of us. Like there's no way for essence or anything on the inside to get out unless there's penetration, right? Like there's got to be some way to get all of these masks and shields and conditionings and identities that we've piled on for a lifetime out. And so what Leo does, and you can think about it like Christ putting on that crown of thorns and the thorns penetrating his head, anything that we want to allow reality to penetrate us. And we spend most of our lives kind of resisting allowing that to happen. Something bad happens and it's like we use our emotional coping skills to not feel it to the depth of maybe the necessity of feeling it, right? So that it can be alchemized or digested. We use all of these kind of Western models to like not let life really touch us in our depths. And then that essence doesn't get penetrated and it doesn't have an avenue out. And so like what we're doing now that we're in this Leo overtoned Venus cycle is allowing life to penetrate us really deeply. And it's like, how do we figure out how to be open enough um, to keep dropping the shield so that we can be penetrated and our essence come out. And once our essence comes out, people can feel us and know us as who we are. Like that's the warmth of the sun. What you feel when the sun radiates on you, that's your sun in your chart. It's my sun in my charts. It's this area in which that big heart of Leo can be felt and experienced. And we can only really experience that with other people when their essence is flowing.
Mm.
And we can't have that without being deeply penetrated. And so there's this, it almost sounds sexual a little bit in nature, doesn't it? Like this being
Yeah.
penetrated and, then having this birth or this essence. And it's interesting because Jesus himself is called he of the morning star. And all of these birth, death, resurrection, or life, death, rebirth mysteries are Venusian mysteries. These are all part of a long mystery school of kind of ruled by this idea of Venus, of this whole trip to the underworld. And then Jesus is a king who's resurrected. And then they piled all this patriarchal stuff on top of his myth to make it this transcendental kind of control mechanism, right? It became like a Roman control mechanism. That's my understanding of it. It's kind of how I hold it now. But the deep mystery of Christianity is also the deep mystery of the feminine. It's
Mm.
interesting um, how seeds of truth, you can dress them up any way you want to, but the seed of truth is there in and of itself. So yeah.
So interesting. Okay, well, so I want to ask you just to, for me, and then also for listeners who don't perhaps know as much about Venus and the Venus cycle, to just kind of help us ground ourselves where we are and what started with Leo and where we are now. So this was there was a Venus retrograde in Leo, right? In August,
Yeah.
July, started in July, right?
Yes. I'll
Um,
do a really quick breakdown.
yeah,
Would you like me
perfect.
to, of the
That'd be
Venus
amazing.
cycle?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Venus cycle is between 18 and 19 months long, and it's broken into two phases. It begins at the retrograde. It's when Venus is rising with the morning sun. So she's the morning star in her first phase after the retrograde. That phase lasts 9 months. So hear it like feminine mysteries. Then she has another conjunction with the sun on the far side of the sun. And when she emerges from that second conjunction, she's in the evening star phase. In her first phase, in the morning star phase that begins after the retrograde, quickly after the retrograde, she's very high in the sky and she descends. It appears like she's descending. So each month she's getting closer and closer, lower and lower in the sky until she falls into what we would call the underworld or below the earth. So it's a lot like being mapped onto Inanna's descent. Each month through this 9 month period, she kind of meets with the moon at this gateway of descent. Pretty soon she gets low enough you can't see her. So we say there's 7 gateways
Mhm.
essentially with the star points. I'd have to get into a lot more detailed astronomy / astrology. Um, but so she is right now, she had her opening retrograde conjunction in August. And then in September, she had her first kind of meeting at a gateway. And so right now, and in my cosmology, I would call that the crown chakra gateway because that's where Inanna removes her crown. Then the next month, she's at the third eye chakra gateway because that's where she removes her earrings. And there's something really interesting between listening and the third eye that are important to that kind of chakra gateway. And then she removes her necklace the following month, which is the throat chakra band of her journey. And then she removes her breastplate, which is where we are now. We're kind of in that heart chakra. She's kind of midway through her descent cycle journey. And so, yeah, we spend 9 months on the descent side disrobing, going through this sort of like revelatory process that happens when we begin to take things off, when we begin to soften, when we allow life to penetrate us, when we stop resisting or distracting ourselves, you know, as a form of
Mhm.
resistance. We drop into that alchemical underworld, and we'll do that in the spring. And we'll allow ourselves to have that experience. It's kind of like that Tibetan experience of making yourself a feast for demons. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's this kind of idea of letting the vultures pick off every last little bit of defense or mask or identity. It's kind of an ego death. And then we spend the next 9 months on the ascent side of Venus's journey, um, going back up through the chakra gateways. But this time it's like everything we put back on is true. It's aligned with that essence that we met in the underworld. And so we come out of this journey kind of like exalted. There's a rebirth, but this rebirth is in alignment with that person we met in the underworld, who is us. It's the
Mhm.
essence self. So was that helpful?
Yes, and I
Okay.
want to ask a question. Let's see if I can get it. I feel like I say this a lot. Like, okay, it's all up here. Can I get it out of
Yeah,
my mouth in a
sure.
coherent way?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so Venus is a morning star, which, by the way, listeners, just go look. Like, there's one thing to talk about this. There's another beautiful thing to literally walk outside and
Mm.
see Venus in the morning sky. She's stunning. She's huge. You cannot miss her. Um, and at least where I live, the skies get super clear in the winter. And so, and also a lot of leaves are off, so I can see really well. But you know, same with the moon too, or anything like go outside and just like, you know, be in this light because it's really special. But I guess I was thinking is like, oh, so there, you've got Venus in the morning sky, which there's a there's almost a way in which you could get that mixed up, right? Because you could be like, well, this is an ascent. She's in the morning sky, but what you're saying is she's actually descending right now. And I'm wondering how that relates to, um, and if it relates to internal process versus external expression. In you know, is there a do you see this as the descent is like a spiraling inward kind of journey? Um, or you know, because of the morning star piece, I tend to think of it as an outward sort of like rising kind of thing. So how do you understand that?
Yeah, she's so fun. So Venus in her morning star, like as soon as she emerges from her conjunction and her new cycle starts and she's in retrograde, she's the closest she ever is to Earth at this time in her cycle. And it is generally when the old cultures used to declare war. She's in her most fiery, potent, rageful, Sekhmet like emanation, right? There's like this, she's strong and egoic, and she's even Inanna in her own mythology is kind of like she's going around to accumulate these me's, right, from these different power centers, and like she's I'm the most powerful goddess in the world. And you can kind of feel this sense of like um yeah, like unconsciousness in her in a way. And this like obsession with power
Mm.
and power over almost. And what's really neat, if you're somebody who follows moon cycles, you understand this. So when Venus meets with the moon every month, we call that a gateway. And on her morning star descent side, she meets with the moon in its waning crescent phase. So it's that's the focal point of energy each month,
Mm.
is that like what's dying? That's what we begin to ask, right? And that final waning piece of the moon, when the moon's just about to go from the kind of dark moon to the new moon, is where Venus meets the moon each month. And then when she changes to evening star side of the cycle, she's much more subtle. The evening star side starts out when Venus is the furthest from the earth, and she's very small and she's low in the sky. She's not bright and high in the sky or close to the earth. And so she's got this kind of transcendent, kind of angelic, just very subtle. We can't really feel her. But on this side of the cycle, she's meeting with the waxing moon. So she meet her meeting comes right after the new moon. So the focal point of energy is on like, what am I accumulating? Who am I? What am I beginning now? What's the new true thing for me to be kind of seeding and gestating in the world? And so it does. The ground, the most fundamental thing I would want to language about the goddess is that she's paradoxical. Like, I think that is the most important thing to understand, is that when we are invited to work with the goddess, we are being invited into paradox.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. That's such an important point to me. I mean, even what you're saying about Venus, and you referenced Sekhmet, I think if you don't know much about the divine feminine, and if you're listening to this and you don't know much, just consider that an invitation to hold paradox right there, because so many people think of Venus, she's the goddess of love. She's overflowing with her warmth and her sensuality and all of that. And Sekhmet, if you don't know her, is, this Egyptian goddess associated with war and sex and death. And, she's got bloodlust. There's this amazing bloodlust story about her that's actually very similar to a bloodlusty story about Kali. And,
Mm.
um, and so, yeah, it's like holding the paradox. I get, I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here, but I get frustrated when I hear people talk about the return of the divine feminine and they're lensing it as this, just like this soft counterpoint, nurturing, sort of um, peaceful, loving thing. And yes, she is that, and she is so much more. And so it's not like a pendulum swing to me when we're inviting the divine feminine back. It is like a rip your heart open expansion of how much complexity can I hold. Like that, I think the lesson that she's really giving us.
Oh my gosh, yes. I'm sitting over here, if people can't see me, nodding my head, going, yes, yes, yes. And when we think about the feminine in that respective of the goddess of love, I think it's a bypass, and I'll explain why. So what I love about working with the Venus cycle is that she is a different energetic, a different frequency, a different facet of the feminine, no matter where she is in her cycle. So she starts out like Sekhmet, and then she becomes, a little bit more lunar, and then a little bit more Mars like. I mean, she takes on all of these different emanations. Then she becomes Ereshkigal, the underworld goddess, right? And like a Lilith, a very, very dark, like you said, rip your heart out. So she begins sort of angry and rageful. But then there's this like big alchemical thing that happens, and a death happens, right? In the underworld. And then as we're kind of emerging on the other side of the cycle, um, we get into that like open-hearted space. But I'll tell you that it has been through the like being penetrated by life, having my heart ripped open, all of my hopes, dreams, and desires kind of turned to ash, that gave me access to my heart in the first place. Like, I did not have access to the bottom of my heart in the way I do now before, like, my son died,
Yeah.
And so there's this way that if we don't go through that like deep alchemical experience of meeting that underworld deity that is so much more powerful than we are, and the power that we meet in the underworld is that of, yes, paradox, but and surrender, like that we realize that we really don't have any control. And today's women, especially this kind of like good woman, Western woman archetype, is that of power and having themselves together, and getting the education and following this kind of like template of the American dream, and that we have the power to make things happen when that's an illusion, you know? And I think that, yeah, that there's definitely a frustration for me as well when we peg the feminine as being one archetype, one sort of rigid archetype, that she's just this goddess of love. And you can have that, but I think you sort of got to go through all of the other steps first. Let
Yeah.
yourself be demolished so you can radiate that deep essence love, that leonine love out into the world.
Hmm.
And not that
Yeah.
people have to, but I think that there's something to look at if you haven't had that kind of deep ripping open experience, that like, how willing are you to have that?
Yeah. Well, and I know in your case that's not a choice you would ever make, right? To lose your child, but I'm wondering, as you've been on this journey of grief, and was your son Tanner, was he your first child, the one that you know? Okay.
Mm-mm.
Um, he, what was that? Can you talk to me about that experience of like, so you had this lens, right? You had this lens of the Venus cycle, you have this lens of this sacred work that you're doing. Was that all very present for you? Has it been present for you as you've been on this journey of grief? Have you been able to have it be present?
Yeah, I mean,
What's, yeah,
I was teaching the Venus cycle when he
yeah,
died. So like that knowledge came first. And I actually think it's been what held me. It's been the container that I received the news of his death in, and it's been the container I've grieved inside of. It gives you a map in a sense, you know. I had prior to this a very traumatic underworld journey about 10 years before losing him. And I didn't have a map of the underworld. And I spent 3 years in resistance to allowing any of that to penetrate me. Like I had this experience. I felt like my husband was like, okay, you've had 3 days of like nonstop crying. It's kind of like you've got little kids. You've got to sort of get up and function as a person. And I can't stay home from work anymore. Like, and I put that in my mind, like, no, I'm a mom, and I'm a woman, and I'm responsible for things, and I don't have time to grieve, to fully feel and process or stop my life and have this happen. So I'm going to put all of my cloaks back on that don't feel like they fit anymore, and I'm going to try to be a functional person in the world. I'm going to try and be who I was five
yeah,
days ago before this thing
right.
happened. And I spent 3 years trying to do that, and it almost killed me. I mean, I ended up with a chronic illness, and um, autoimmune stuff happened, and I got addicted to things that I shouldn't have been addicted to, and like all in this effort to preserve this archetype of mother and good woman that I thought was so important. And it wasn't until I was like, I can't do this anymore. And now I'm being broken, not just by the thing that initially broke me, but by all of the resistance as well, that I finally fell to the underworld and had the cathartic experience that completely transformed me. It was like a decade ago. And then I was like, oh, so that's how you do the underworld. Like you completely let go. And a lot of what we do on the descent side of Venus's journey is look at all of our inborn resistance, our inborn shields, our inborn the places where we're frozen numb or just don't have the capacity to be open because of
Mhm.
whatever beliefs we have about who we're supposed to show up as, and just kind of let it all fall to ash. And it doesn't mean like losing your life or your house or your relationships. It looks like an internal project. This is something that's happening on the inside when you do it consciously. But yeah, I think that if I hadn't had that map, I don't know what I would have tried to do in the wake of Tanner's death, but I gave myself just an unbelievable amount of permission to grieve and to be where I was in the moment, and to really drink of the nectar of what grief provides, because it is such a watering and nourishing emotion. Or I don't even know, emotion's not the right word. It's a substance. It really is. It's like an alchemical nectar, like a nectar of immortality or something. It's got something very erotic. I know that sounds strange, and vital in it, that connects us with our loved ones, but it also keeps us connected to life so that we
Mhm.
ourselves don't sort of like rot on the vine. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Something that I've been thinking about lately, and I'm had not really thought it. Well, I thought about it in terms of time, but not specifically like cycles, like a Venus cycle or whatever. Is the idea, and I want to hear you reflect on this too. The idea that sometimes that which is in shadow. So I'm imagining like layers to grief, layers to things that, um, right? Because it doesn't all get revealed at once. So I've been thinking about how, and this is, indicative of my personality, how in prior times I'd kind of walked through the world trying to kick doors open, like force things open, like to push my body past the point where it's saying, no, I don't want to do anymore. Um, push me to show up in the world in ways that were terrifying to me, but I got to get over that fear. So get out there and do it, like that kind of energy. And that there's a, like, just this idea that what if there's a divine order to how all of that is unfolding? Like, what if something is in the shadow in this moment because I'm not ready to look at it yet, or because there is a cycle and a process and an order in the ways in which this is being revealed? And if I am willing to have it be revealed, I'm not saying no, but if I can't see it in this moment, maybe trusting that there will be a moment in which that cycle is going to give me an opportunity to see it instead of trying to force my way through the door.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with that premise. Like, I think that that's what you're talking about is kind of like divine order and
Mm-hmm.
divine revelation. And you kind of mentioned, this is why the like the really playing with the threads of humanity and divinity are important because, you know, when we're not understanding mm, what the moment is inviting us into, we can use our human force and it kind of meddles almost like a meddling mother with maybe what was for us, like
Yeah.
we push past something and we miss an exit somewhere versus um when we're really kind of staying attuned. And I love the word attuned because it's such a Venus word. It's a Venusian word. To being attuned to what life is inviting us into, it becomes a lot more like that modality Aikido that kind of like takes the momentum that's coming at it and it uses that momentum to quote unquote defend itself. But like it's just essentially an energy practice that allows
Mm.
you to stay with the truth and the momentum of the moment. And I think there's absolutely, it's such a Saturnine thing to say, there's something on the other side of this threshold that I can't see right now. And Saturn, his job is to say no. And sometimes, and we don't like that no. We're very, the Western world is a Mars, it's a Mars corporation. It wants to power over, power through. And yeah, I think it's a lot like, I spent years in the childbirth world, like actual childbirth. And it's a lot like during my first birth, my son hadn't descended all the way into the birth canal. And they had me pushing for hours when he wasn't fully engaged. And so I was pushing like against nature and his birth was traumatic to my body, not to my psyche, but like it really did some damage to my insides to not be working with the force of
Yeah.
nature. And I think revelation is like that, what you're speaking
Mm.
to, like something being in the shadows, it's in the shadows for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, I know we're running low on time, so I just want to ask you because it feels to me like it would be really bypassing to not at least talk to you for a moment or two about what is happening in the world right now, especially given that you have lived in Palestine, and I realize that's a gigantic subject that could be its own conversation, but I am curious about, and I want to do this in a really respectful way, like not in a super philosophical way because people are freaking dying. And so, not like, let's step back and look at the broader patterns. But I am curious if you have, like, as you're watching this and you have this personal experience with this country and these people, and especially because you named that it felt like home to you when you were there, and then sort of your work and understanding these larger cycles, like if there's anything that you might feel called to share around that right now.
Yeah, and I can share it because I think astrologically speaking, it's a sound thing to say. I'll speak maybe from the energetics
Yeah.
because it is such a touchy subject. And my practice is really mm, not to know. like there actually is a lot of power in not knowing things and not becoming self-righteous. I feel like every time I feel like I know what's going on over there, I sort of step into this sense of like self-righteousness. And I think it doesn't really serve. So my practice is sort of to be an inquiry
Mhm.
around things and kind of surrender to the broader thing. I don't know, and to that essence that lives within me. So when I was watching the astrology, this latest round of escalation broke out right when there was the eclipses, and those eclipses happened in Libra, and Libra is a sign of karmic balance. Justice card for the tarot is ruled by Libra, and we see those scales, and it's not about balancing something statically. It's about how nature, in essence, seeks balance. It always does. And it seeks to right wrongs. And it seeks justice. And in a sense, um, humans are intoned with an impulse, like a natural impulse towards liberation and seeking justness. This word justice has sort of been codified by the collective, but so understanding it's justness that Libra is trying to bring about, and that is through karmic balancing or the scales of Mott. And so we see that there's a piece of um, righting an injustice that's woven in here. This is astrologically speaking. And then very soon after that, we had these two eclipses that both pointed to um, justice, fairness, law. Uh, Libra is about peace and harmony. So it speaks to us about all of the imbalances that actually go into creating harmony. Like there's so many imbalances that we have to be with. And then we moved into the sign of Scorpio, and Scorpio is the mystery. It's about transformation, and the energetic of Scorpio is very chaotic. It's chaos. And we had Mars conjunct the sun. Um, in some schools of astrology, that's the halfway point of his cycle. In other schools, it's the beginning point. I like to look at it from both perspectives because paradox, Um, but when Mars is conjunct the sun, you can't see him. He's kind of like occulted by the beams of the sun. He's on the far side of the sun. And so we're not feeling him. And when you have Mars is sort of our divine will, it's how we act on the divine spark, how we put our own sacred authority behind what we want to do in the world. And when we're cut off from that, what you end up getting is a kind of combination of egoic machismo like energy. It's like how the ego would assert itself. And so I felt that come up in the collective. And then that new moon in Scorpio was Mars against the opposing Uranus in the sign of Taurus. And so it's kind of like this life death, accumulation, purging energy. And as I looked at that, I'm like, you know what? This is a tower moment. That's what this is. We're in a tower moment. And to explain what I mean, Libra is sort of the tower, right? So the tower is our temple. It is the bricks that we lay towards our divinity. A tower can also be symbolized by a ladder, right? It's this ascension path. And it becomes crystallized, the tower does. And a tower moment, what that is. So the tower has this like gleaming top to it, represents the crown chakra, right? When everything is up here towards transcendence. The tower moment is when an outside force hits the tower because stasis has set in, something static or stagnant has set in. And you can see in all the imagery of the tower card in the tarot that there's these men falling off the top of the tower. So it's like the protectors of the beliefs of the crown chakra are falling down, and all of the things we believed to be true are up for grabs. We don't really know anymore what it is that we're looking at. And this is a necessary part of the evolutionary cycle, is to have the destruction. It's just built in evolutionary wise. And we can see with that mapped onto the Israel-Palestine issue that essentially Palestine there had been all these political machinations involved in sort of keeping it static, in not answering the question and not resolving it. And thus it had sort of rotted and decayed. And it started that part of the alchemical process where just there was no movement and nothing was happening. And so what I see happening now is sort of this tower moment where this huge eruption of stagnant energies that had been pushed underground, our Promethean impulse towards liberation had been kind of stunted and pushed down for long enough that there had to be action in order to move on this, to resolve the question. It can't stay the way it is. And so I think that that's what we're seeing. And as grim and difficult as it is on the human level, like there's so many different layers to this issue.
Yeah.
When we're speaking about it, I think from the most meta perspective, that's what we're seeing overall is this need to re-energize kind of life into the issue again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Oof. Um,
And paradox. I mean, like that
right.
idea that what's happening is an infusion of life while so much death is happening seems very
Right.
paradoxical, but I also think it is deeply true.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I said this in something that I put on social media fairly recently too. And I, also want to just just name it because I think that listeners, I hope you would know this, but I want to name it anyways. That just and it is um it's a different thing to be sitting in the comfort of my home, not threatened by violence or war or terror or any of this. And I feel lucky and grateful that I am there, and I'm aware that that allows me to sit back and have this kind of conversation and to be able to kind of take a step back and reflect on what this all means, and that there's so many people that don't have that right now. And so just sending many blessings and a lot of love to them too.
Yeah. And I add one more little piece to this,
Please.
just because
Yeah.
I think it ties into the very beginning of our conversation.
Yeah.
You know, what I see between these two people are, so we've got land, which is the mother, and you see like one group of children who are desperately trying not to be disconnected from the mother. And I very much relate to that as an adoptee. Like the separation from the mother is such a it's a psychic annihilation. There's a real annihilation that happens. And then you've got another child, in a sense, or a group of children who had been exiled or separated from the mother, who are trying now to reconnect. And if we could use that map to find compassion, right? Like a deep sense of compassion for everyone who is involved in this conflict, and understand that there are such like deep traumatic wounds and that they mirror each other so almost precisely, the different kinds of wounds. I think that that's an important lensing to put on it, because we can very easily map on other things like social justice movements and social justice language. And on one hand, it's a helpful framing to because it's accurate. And then on the other hand, we have to remember that there's, in peace, there has to be partners. And so, like, we can't exile the who would be our peace partner through not really viewing the situation like with all of the nuance and complexity that it deserves. And this, I think that we as Western people who live as exiles, like we are all orphans,
Yeah.
and we have this orphan experience. Like you mentioned at the beginning, we're on land that does not belong to us. We don't come from this land. Our body doesn't know this land. Um, and so having that experience going to Palestine, like feeling like, oh, I know this land was remarkable. It was not that I'm claiming it as my own, but like it just was a remarkable experience. I think it brings in a really needed and necessary um, psychological conversation for all of us. Like, what is important to preserve? What kind of reverence do we need to have when we're when we are dealing with somebody else's land, and what do we need to tend to within ourselves, our exiled pieces, our orphaned pieces, that keeps perpetuating violence and harm onto others because it's coming from an orphaned or exiled place. So I wanted to add that last little piece in.
No, I really appreciate that. That feels like such rich territory to reflect upon and a really good way to kind of wrap up this conversation. And I'm grateful that you're able to stay a little bit longer
Yeah, it
and get
was
into
great.
that. Yeah, and it went really fast for me. Damascena, thank you so much for your time. I'm really, really grateful. This has been beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. It was a very deep conversation. I hope people who are listening could follow along. I felt like we really went pretty deep there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and if you find yourself getting lost, listeners, just come back and listen to it again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
And
have a
have,
lot of I have a lot of transmissions where I kind of start at the 101 place and take people deep. You know, we went to lots of different places very deep very quickly, but if people wanted to check out my website, like I
yeah.
talk about a lot of this same stuff. Hopefully bringing you into it from a 101 place versus
Yes. And
yeah.
so can you tell him your website name and I will be sure to put this in the show notes too.
Yeah, sure. It's www.redmoonrevival.org. That's my
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, so I'll make sure that's in the show notes along with any other social media so you can follow
Yes, and I
Damascena.
love Facebook. Yes, people can connect with me on Facebook. I love just the community that has been gathering on my Facebook page. It's been a lot of fun.
And she shares really, really wonderfully insightful things there. So be sure to check it out. And thank you, as always, to all of you for being here, for listening, especially as we wrap up this year. You might be listening to this in 2024, but I am so grateful that there have been enough of you that want to listen to this that I've been able to do this for 4 years. It's pretty cool. I will be back in 2024. I'm not sure. In the past years, I've often taken January off from releasing episodes, and I'm in a very like wishy. I don't know. I don't know. So you may be hearing from me in January. You may not. But if you don't, just I'm coming back. So be sure to keep looking if you don't see new episodes right away. And until I talk to you, take very, very good care of yourselves.
Mm.